Hello everyone, and welcome to another session of The Brown Couch with Vanita, me. Today is our last session for 2021. We will be going into hiatus until 2022, so I would like to thank everyone who has viewed, who has subscribed, who continue to follow, who tell me what an awesome job we're doing. They love the stories we're telling, that we will be back in 2022 with some more great stories. Today, I will be sitting down with a good friend of mine that I met several years ago, and I got to tell you, when I met this gentleman, he seemed like this shy, little innocent man. I got to tell you, far beyond being shy and innocent. Please sit back, and I welcome Zach to the Brown Couch. Welcome, Zach.
Thank you.
So I like to start every episode with how did we meet, where did we meet, why did we meet? So if you could tell us, where did we meet?
Well, the first time we actually met, and I'm not sure if you remember this or not, was at the reentry fair at Chillicothe Correctional right before I was released. And I was...
No, I don't.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah. I was going table to table and was collecting, the resources, putting a plan together. And that was where I first met you, and got all the flyers. Here's the programs I'm going to do. Here's where I'm going to help from. Fast forward to April, first week of April, 2018, and I had just been released like a week ago on Good Friday. And the first Friday of April was First Step.
Yes.
And came with a close friend of mine to the High Means Job Center, went to the basement, all these people, a lot of the same people that I had spoken with at CCI. And I was thrilled to see them again on the outside, have my street clothes on.
Your gray sweater.
My gray sweater, yes, yes. And went again, table to table to table. And sadly, almost every person that said they would help me in CCI had not told me about the fine print, and now they all couldn't help me. And so we met because you were one of the few people that said, I'll help you. And there was no condition upon it. There was no funding that was driving your ability to help. It was just, here I am. This is what we do.
So I actually don't remember meeting you in Chillicothe. And one of the people I spoke to in one of my previous sessions said, Vanita, I know you don't remember everybody. And I was like, well, I remember you. I don't remember you. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Because my whole thing with starting this session with you would have been, I thought it was at First Step Friday. Because I remember your presence. You have a presence when you walk into a room, whether you know it or not. And you just stuck out. I mean, it was like, why is this person here? And you came over to our table and you were looking for resources. And I remember you sat with me, and then I think I took you over to Wendy Tarr. And then the next thing I knew, we were all sitting around in the center of the room with you there just talking to you. And I wondered what you were looking for.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that conversation is indicative of the same issues that we still have now, which is that for someone who is incarcerated and is re-entering with an offense of a sexual nature, it really takes strategic wrapping of arms around that person to help them be successful. And I think that group of us was really like the epitome of that. I love the work that a lot of our reentry partners do in the community, but for whatever reason, there are limitations. And so for those of us who don't want to limit, right, the help that we can give, and don't have to limit the help we can give, we often find ourselves, kind of from a more equitable lens, giving reentry resources. And so that, after having been told that a lot of these funding sources were not able to assist, that gave me hope. And when I sat down with all of you, I was pretty low because
you were.
I was excited. I was excited to be there. And
you could see it over your face. There wasn't excitement in your face. There was an unsureness in your face.
Yeah. A lot of guilt.
There was a sadness in your face. I remember that. You were very quiet.
Yeah.
But boy, you are not quiet. And I wondered, when you went into First Step, were you, like you said, were you going to see what can be helpful for you, or did you even imagine fast forward to 2021, that you would be an advocate out here and be doing what you're doing now. Was that even in your mind?
I think initially, because I was so fresh out, I was still adjusting, getting used to everything from riding in a vehicle and all of a sudden being car sick riding in a vehicle. I'd never dealt with that before. To like how heavy silverware was, because I was used to plastic sporks in the chow hall, to still feeling like, oh, I'm missing my ID and it's time for a count. But I was sitting in my living room. I was still dealing with a lot of the trauma.
How many years did you do?
2 years, 9 months. Yeah.
2 years, 9 months.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so that it was so new that I just knew that I needed to get on a path. And I had made a plan, foolishly, I guess, before I got out. And
don't you know God always
changed.
has another plan for everybody?
He sure does. And he spun me in a few directions that I never anticipated. And to your point, within 6 months of that release, I found myself working for a church, found myself working for a very close friend and helping him manage 2 businesses, found myself volunteering, and found myself really beginning to see the purpose behind the greatest mistake I ever made in my life, which is to give a voice to those folks who may not have support or may not have the opportunity at those reentry fairs to have folks sit down with them in a circle and say, okay, we can't do this, let's try this. Okay, that didn't work, let's try this. Oh, we should call so-and-so. Yeah, because they know, like, that's really what it takes.
It does.
And to find myself now 3 years a part of that, we should call so-and-so because they know so-and-so, it's incredibly humbling.
For someone who is coming out who does not have a plan or think they have a plan and they're trying to get ahead, how important is it that they volunteer to you? I mean,
well, I think it's important to always take the opportunity to share your story when you're ready. I think, kind of like coming here today, I had to think, who has earned the right to hear my story? And that sounds cocky, but really it's the idea of making sure that I'm in a place with my own mental health and my own journey, that I am prepared to go back to that place, go back to that first week out, go back to being told no by so many places. And that's important, number one. Number two, and this was something that my dear friend Michael Daniels reminded me in one of my first job performance reviews with his office, was you've got to put your own oxygen mask on first. And so,
what does that mean?
To me, it means that I am only as much help to someone else as the work that I'm willing to do on my own self-care. And if I am piecing out myself to the point that I have nothing left for me at the end of the day, whether it's playing piano or doing yoga or playing with my dog, whatever self-care looks like for me, if that's not a part of the equation, I am at risk of burnout and I am at risk of being no help to anyone. And so volunteering is certainly important because that's how we change hearts and minds. But we can't rush to volunteering so quickly that we forget to do the work on ourselves first.
Exactly. I know when I'm talking to people and they don't have a path yet, I'm like, well, come with me. Come volunteer with me. I think one of the greatest things that I've done is I've taken people when they are ready back into the institution. To tell their stories, and I got to tell you, that's so much rewarding for that person that I brought back in there with them, as well as those who are incarcerated, to see someone who has walked their path to come back in.
And that's
when they're ready.
Exactly. And that's about a month ago, I drove down to see a friend of mine in Chillicothe, and inadvertently found myself driving by CCI, and I didn't realize my route was going to take me by it. And so I saw the water tower and I was like, oh my gosh, that's CCI. And so I took the turn, and it was after dinner and everyone was out on the yard walking around. And to be able to look on that yard from the other side of the fence and know probably what several folks who are still very dear to me were doing, the church service they were in, the band they were practicing with, the basketball team that they were, out at rec with. But here I am driving by and I get to keep going. There was some guilt, almost like survivor's guilt, I think. And it...
Explain it.
That I'm out, and that there are people that I very much care for who may never leave that fence. And it's intense to know that I did my time and now I'm out. There are folks still in CCI who I played in a band with, who I was in the church choir with, who I ate dinner with most nights of the week, who will never leave that compound until they're in a wooden box.
Wow.
And that's, I mean, and so what is the best that they can do? What does finding meaning for them look like in that environment?
Are you allowed to write them now that you're off of parole?
I am. Yeah. And I mean, that is the piece that allows me to kind of work through that guilt, is knowing that they have found meaning, and in some cases have found joy. I mean, it is possible to do that. And so for those of us who can come back to society and share our story and share what finding meaning inside and bringing that back out with us has looked like, I think that's incredibly important and really powerful.
Wow. Wow. So let's walk through your journey of volunteering. Where did you start? Please, oh boy.
Where did I start? Well, let's see.
From my perspective, I think it was when you were at First Step Friday, you asked me what services that were needed. I do believe I said to you, there's a summit.
Yes.
And they are always looking for returning citizens to sit on the summit.
Yep.
And
it kind of coalesced at the same time that I found myself in the cubicle of Maria Ford. And the two of you were very, very, very enthusiastic about me getting involved. Apparently we'd been planning a Restored Citizen Summit for years and hadn't had many restored citizens involved in the planning of it. So it was interesting to be a part of that process. And I think it allowed some folks that was doing the work for them over there to now say, we're doing the work for us and we in the community aspect of it. And that was important to me, to be able to bring that perspective. It was also important to be able to bring the perspective of what are we doing on the other 360 some days of the year. So
with that, that's an introduction into what's called the collaborative. So from out of the summit branched the collaborative.
Yeah. And I mean, I very early on, as just like a marketing minded guy, I led a choir at a school for a number of years, and I just kind of had to do the marketing and all the other stuff with that. I saw an opportunity to really do some, not rebranding, but some organizing the brands, organizing the products. And so, looking at the annual tangible events. So the Employment Expo and the Justice Expo and the Restored Citizen Summit, First Step Fridays, all of the things that were happening sporadically, they all are being done by a lot of the same people who have the same heart for service.
Yes.
So let's collect that into something, and let's start addressing this other piece, which is, what are we doing the rest of the year when we're not doing this one day? And they're incredibly powerful events, and they are complex to organize, don't I know? Don't you know? But I thought that perhaps there was a need for us to amplify the network. And so that's what we started to do.
So out of the summit and the collaborative, say the full name of the collaborative.
Central Ohio Restored Citizens Collaborative.
And how did you come up with that name?
I mean, it was Central Ohio Restored Citizens named the event, the summit, the chat series, the Employment Expo. And so what it all was the Central Ohio Restored Citizens. This is a collaborative effort at its best. And every single event took a collaboration of many, many different parties. And so, that kind of umbrella branding gave us something to say, okay, here is the group doing the work, and here's all the different ways that we're doing that work. And so at the same time that you and Maria were speaking to me, it seemed like that was where some of that more micro event stuff started to happen. So it was timely in that one of the first events that I came to that was sponsored by this group, and I believe you were at it, was when they started doing the Restored Citizens chat series.
Exactly.
And so that was really one of the first things that we saw, apart from the first step, that was geared more toward community and less about just, here's a flyer, give us a call, come to our office. This was share your story. And it almost always came back to trauma. It almost always came back to what I felt 2 weeks ago, 3 years later, right?
Yeah.
It's sneaky. That post-incarceration trauma is so sneaky.
So the chat series, talk a little bit about some of the topics or people who showed up, or what were some of the outcomes?
Yeah, I think one of my favorite topics, and a phrase that I still think about, especially with folks who I encounter or reconnect with after their release, is starting over legit. That was one of the topics. And I love that phrase because I think about the number of folks who it would be so easy to just jump right back into the gangbanging or jump right back into their hustle hand. You call it what you will. To start over legit, what does that mean? And that means something different for everyone. But what does it mean to put aside potentially some of the behavior that landed you where you did? Maybe not. I mean, we know that I think like 30% of the people sitting in prisons right now did not do the crime that they pled guilty to. But for the ones who have a number of risk factors that come from the way that they have been or are living, what does it look like to set those aside? And again, it's hard to start over legit if you haven't addressed the trauma. What's your ACEs score? Probably through the roof. And
What's the ACEs? What's the ACEs?
Adverse childhood experiences score, something like that. But it talks about, like, for example, I lost both of my parents by the time I was 23 years old. I was raised in a home with addiction. I was raised in a home with severe mental illness. I had to hide my identity as a gay male, and so I could go to college. There was spiritual abuse. There was neglect. There was being raised in a single parent household during my high school years. So each of those things raises my ACEs score.
So I'm going to change the subject here a little bit. So I found out something about you last week. So during all this time that your parents have passed away, and when were you on this farm that I heard you grew up on?
There we go. Yeah, so born and raised in Noble County, 300-acre cattle farm. It's a functioning cattle farm. Like, can still remember getting in the back of the pickup truck and breaking apart the bales of the hay for the cattle in the winter, getting the call at 2 a.m. that a calf stuck and we had to run up to the barn and help get it free so it could be born safely, warming up bottles of milk.
Was this your parents' farm?
This was my mom's side, so my maternal grandparents. And it was on its way toward retirement when I was born, but I still have wonderful memories of coming home from school, because my mom taught at the school that I went to. She would drop me off on the hillside and Grandpa would be on the tractor, and I'd run and jump on the tractor with him, like 6, 7 years old.
Wow.
It was a really special place to be born and to be raised. I always tell folks that a lot of the connection to humanity that I have, and just the sincere desire to help, to share, to teach, comes from where I was raised and how I was raised. My mother was a teacher, like I said. I was raised around incredibly community-minded, generous people. Now on the other side of that, though, and that's been one of the important parts of my 12-step journey, is when does some of that nostalgia prevent me from seeing some of those traumas that I really need to look into and address. Right. And so while, yes, my mom was doing the best that she could and would write a check for someone at the grocery store who didn't have the money behind them to pay for her groceries, she was also stopping at the convenience store and drinking a beer the entire way home with us afterwards. And so for me, ironing out the nostalgia of my youth has also been not only the fond memories, but also the places where, like, that's not the most ideal environment for a child to be raised in, but again, we're all doing the best we can.
Wow. You have said the word trauma several times during this talk.
Yeah.
Have you sought professional help for your trauma?
I have, and my hope is, and DRC, if you're listening,
Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections.
That's right, yes. So for me, one of the most significant ways that I've been able to treat my own trauma is through EMDR. Which is basically replicating your eyes that go back and forth when you're asleep in rapid eye movement. And in doing so, you focus on a place where your trauma is stuck. And it's usually the last vivid memory you have of a traumatic event. And you share with the counselor what is the belief that you have about this event. It's usually like, I'm not safe, I can't survive this, whatever. And then they say, okay, what would the opposite of that be like? And it's, I can survive this, or I'll be okay. And throughout that EMDR session, you just let new memories play out in your mind. And often the brain, when given the opportunity, will resolve those traumas into something that you can cope with. And so the traumatic phrase that you share with yourself before going into that session versus the opposite belief of safety and security afterwards shifts. And so I had a wonderful counselor. I had several wonderful counselors at CCI, one of whom wanted to do EMDR with me. She was not permitted to because, believe it or not, there are some things about DRC that are not quite up to speed yet. But she did tell me that I should look into it when I was released. And so I did that immediately, and it has been a game changer for me.
So what I want you to do right now is tell the audience, especially someone who's coming out of incarceration who may not recognize they have trauma, or those that know they have trauma but have not seeked it, how important that is for them, for the success of them back into the community.
Yeah, I think if someone really wants to do the work of starting over legit, of doing the work of restoration, because when we say restored citizens, you know, there are certain rights that are restored to a citizen when they're released, right? But I also think the work of restoration is the work of saving one's life, saving your own life. That, in my opinion, can only be done if you look the trauma square in the eyes. And for me, that is what has allowed me to move forward to where I am today, to move forward toward healthier living, to being an advocate, to being an activist. It's important because it allows us to be a little bit more gentle with ourselves. It allows us to put a reason behind, why am I having a panic attack and I just got done grocery shopping? Why do I feel like I need to protect my loaf of bread that I just set on the table? Well, it's because a month ago you may have had to, or somebody would cut your net bag on the way back from the commissary. It's okay that you're feeling that way. Now let's look at addressing that. And in doing so, you peel back the layers of the onion, and it's gonna smell bad. But you know, you lean into it, and it really, for me, I think is a critical component for reentry that my hope is in coming years we will see emphasized.
Wow.
So
let's talk to some good news.
Good
I
news.
heard that you are a graduate of Just Leadership USA.
I am.
Could you tell everybody what is Just Leadership USA and how important was it for you to get into this cohort and be a part of this?
yeah, so Just Leadership USA dates back to, we did this on the graduation ceremony. It was like Jeopardy, 2014, I believe. And it is a leadership fellowship that was created specifically for folks who want to be more effective leaders, advocates, policymakers, policy mappers, but all of whom have direct involvement with the justice system. And it doesn't necessarily all have to be folks with a conviction. It could be loved ones of folks with convictions, any sort of, or child perhaps, any sort of directly impacted folks. And so it's a year-long cohort, and it was intense. You had one-on-one coaching where they give you this assessment of 5 different pieces that make up effective leadership, everything from challenging the way to encouraging the heart. And you give that to anywhere between 20 and 40 folks that work with you day in and day out, and they assess you. And so that serves as the basis of your leadership coaching, but then you lean into specific topics like self-care, like conflict resolution, like nonprofit board management, policy mapping, power mapping. It is expansive, and it's a lot of work. And so for the last 10, 11 months, I had the pleasure of Zooming, but with folks from all over the Midwest. And, we were taught by professors from American University and folks who have multiple book deals, and like Piper Kerman is on the board of directors with,
is she?
Yeah, from Orange is the New Black.
Orange is the New Black.
Yeah,
yes.
no, so some incredible people out there doing the work. And so they, pour all of those resources into us as newer leaders, younger leaders, in hopes that we can continue to advance their goal, which is to cut the incarceration in half over the next couple of decades.
So Zach, I know you're a spiritual person.
Yeah.
Where are you? So I know that, were you raised Catholic?
They sprinkled me when I came out. Yeah. And then from there, it was just kind of the high holy days that they drug me to mass. I was, yes.
So did you go through did you do your communion, your penance?
Oh, no.
Okay.
No, so that was my dad's side of the family. And we were kind of insulated on the farm on my mom's side of the family that were more like Methodist Baptist, Protestant leaning. So I was baptized Catholic when I was born. And then on the farm, there was a little farm church up on the hill. Things changed when Dad got sick.
Okay.
I was 11 and he got diagnosed with cancer. And I saw someone that I kind of saw as a beacon of strength. Certainly saw plenty of imperfections, right? Addict, probably a sex addict as well, workaholic, a lot of, stuff that looking back on now I can see. But still, he's Dad. And so over the course of those 2 years, we got more involved in that Methodist church. But after he had passed, a group of my peers took me under their wing. They were Southern Baptist. And so I felt a strong calling to be a part of that community. So I found that sense of community in that group. Unfortunately, it came with fairly oppressive theology. And so I left the church altogether when I went to college. I felt like in order to really come out as a gay man, that's the only option I had. Thankfully, toward the end of my college years, I found out that there are churches who are open and affirming. And so when I moved to Columbus to teach, I started going to King Avenue Methodist. And I was like, this is it. This is what I always wanted and needed. Unfortunately, by the time I found that, I was already pretty deep into my own addiction, grief, mental health challenges. I was completely unaware of a lot of the things that kind of all were a perfect storm that caused me to offend, essentially. And so again, during the litigation of my case, I finally got serious about my mental health, about my grief, and I got into a 12-step group. And it was that 12-step journey, those first 2 years when I was exploring step 6 and 7 and looking at defects of character, grandiosity, pride, control, that I started to look at the other side of those things that I had really used as ways to keep me safe my whole life. Right? Control, what is control? Control means dumping out half of your mom's vodka and putting water in its place so maybe she'll be sober till dinner. That worked for me, but it wasn't working for me at that point. So as a 26, 27-year-old guy who was facing multiple felony charges, I figured out what positive spiritual principles were. And that is really what transformed things. Thankfully, I started to turn that corner before I was sentenced because those came with me into prison and really served as the basis of a lot of really meaningful relationships and conversations in there. It's also now allowed me to work for a church that is just as affirming of many things about me. And so that has been the journey. It started with religion. Religion did not work for me. I mean, the people that were practicing the religion did not work for me in their interpretation.
Exactly.
But then finding that sense of positive spirituality has now brought me full circle to a place where I can really see where grace, mercy, truth, hospitality, charity, those things are really, that is my gospel.
Amen. Come on, amen.
Amen. Yes.
Amen. Amen. Well, Zach, thank you so much. I know you've been like, Vanita, when am I going to sit down on the brown couch? When am I coming to the brown couch? Well, you have made it to the brown couch.
I made it.
You are my last guest for 2021. And I want you to say happy holidays with me for everybody.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays, and we'll see you in 2022.